Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking something absolutely crucial. We are looking at the invisible power of small actions. And I really want you to think about this because what we're going to cover isn't just theory, it's a fundamental shift in how we understand success and failure.
Look, we have all been there. Have you ever felt that crushing, heavy frustration of trying so hard to change your life, only to wake up a few weeks later and realize you're right back exactly where you started? We get this sudden burst of inspiration, right? We completely convinced ourselves that massive, earth-shattering success requires massive, exhausting action. We go all in. But then, the motivation just fades. It always does. Why is it so agonizingly hard to maintain consistency? Well, here's the secret. The problem isn't that you lack willpower. Actually, scratch that. Willpower has very little to do with it. The real problem is a fundamental psychological misunderstanding of how human progress actually works. We're totally conditioned by society to obsess over the dramatic breakthrough. But the truth? The truth is far quieter and, honestly, infinitely more powerful.
Okay, let's dive into this with one of the most incredible turnarounds in sports history. Back in 2003, the British cycling team was, well, the literal definition of mediocrity. For over 100 years, no British cyclist had ever won the Tour de France. They were so underwhelming that the top bike manufacturers in Europe actually refused to sell them gear because they were afraid it would hurt their brand. Ouch! But then they hired a guy named Dave Brailsford. And Dave didn't come in screaming, demanding massive, exhausting overhauls. Instead, he introduced this philosophy he called the aggregation of marginal gains. The strategy was simple, but honestly, it was radical. He said, let's break down everything. Literally every single tiny thing that goes into riding a bike, and let's just improve it by 1%. They redesigned the seats. They rubbed alcohol on the tires for a tiny bit better grip. They even hired a surgeon to teach the riders the absolute best way to wash their hands so they wouldn't catch a cold. Tiny, seemingly invisible, almost ridiculous changes.
But what were the results of those tiny changes? Just 5 years later, they completely dominated the Beijing Olympics, taking home 60% of the gold medals available. Then, they went on to win 5 Tour de France victories in just 6 years. No one could believe it. So how did they do it? It really just comes down to the staggering, undeniable math behind tiny improvements. Improving by 1% isn't headline news. On any given day, you probably won't even notice it. But, and this is a huge but, if you can get just 1% better each day for a single year, the math dictates that you will end up mathematically 37 times better by the time you're done. 37 times!
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it visually explains this. Habits are essentially the compound interest of self-improvement. Look at that curve on the screen. In the beginning, the line for getting 1% better and the line for getting 1% worse are virtually indistinguishable. I mean, they look completely flat. And this right here is exactly why we dismiss small changes. If you save a little money today, you're on a millionaire. If you go to the gym 3 days in a row, you're still out of shape. The changes seem to make literally zero difference in the moment. But look at the right side of the graph. Over months and years, that curve just explodes upward. It's only when you look back 2, 5, or 10 years later that the massive value of good habits becomes strikingly apparent. But we have to be careful because compounding is a double-edged sword. Time magnifies the margin between success and failure. It will ruthlessly multiply whatever you feed it. Positive compounding builds you up, right? Learning one new idea doesn't make you a genius today, but a system of lifelong learning compounds into incredible knowledge. Accomplishing one extra task compounds your overall productivity. But negative compounding, that cuts you down. The frustration of a traffic jam, a tiny bit of elevated blood pressure, these little stresses seem totally manageable. But when they persist for years, when you keep duplicating tiny mistakes and rationalizing those little excuses, they compound into toxic results and serious life issues. You absolutely have to know how this blade cuts if you want to survive it.
To really grasp why we struggle so much emotionally with this delay in results, let's try a quick thought experiment. Imagine an ice cube sitting on a table right in front of you. The room is cold, say 25 degrees. Ever so slowly, the room begins to heat up. 26 degrees, 27, 28. You're looking at the ice cube. It just sits there, unchanged. 29, 30, 31. Still, absolutely nothing has happened. At this point, you're probably thinking your heater is completely broken. But then, 32 degrees, the ice begins to melt. A single 1-degree shift, a tiny change seemingly no different from the temperature increases right before it, has suddenly unlocked a massive physical transformation.
And this brilliantly illustrates what we call the plateau of latent potential. And honestly, this should provide you with some deep, deep psychological relief.
Complaining about not achieving success despite working hard is exactly like complaining about an ice cube not melting when you heated it from 25 to 31 degrees. Your past efforts were absolutely not wasted. They were just being stored. All the explosive action happens at 32 degrees. See, we expect our progress to be perfectly linear. We want to put in a week of hard work and clearly see a week's worth of results. But when we don't, we fall straight into that dip on the graph, the valley of disappointment. You think, man, I've been running every day for a month, why can't I see any change in the mirror? And because you don't see it, you quit.
And that brings us to the great illusion of success. The outside world only ever sees the dramatic breakthrough. They only see the exact moment the ice melts. They only see the moment a bamboo tree shoots 90 feet into the air, completely blind to the fact that it spent the last 5 years building an invisible, massive root system underground. They love to call it an overnight success. But you know the truth. You know it's the quiet, invisible work you did months or years ago, when it felt like you were making zero progress, that makes today's jump possible. It's like geological pressure. Two tectonic plates grind against each other for millions of years, tension slowly, silently building, until one day they rub again in the exact same way and an earthquake erupts.
So, what does this all mean for us? How do we actually apply this to our lives? Well, we have to shift our entire paradigm. Prevailing self-help wisdom always claims that the absolute best way to get what you want is to set specific, actionable goals. We obsess over the exact number of pounds we want to lose or the exact salary we want to make. But if you want to truly transform, you must completely forget about goals and focus entirely on systems. As the creator of Dilbert, Scott Adams, brilliantly points out, goals are about the results you want to achieve. Systems are about the processes that actually lead to those results. Think about it. If you're a basketball coach, your goal is obviously to win a championship. But your system? Your system is how you recruit players, how you manage your assistant coaches, and how you conduct daily practice. If you completely ignored the championship goal and only focused on having the best possible daily practice, you would still succeed.
The crazy thing is, setting a goals-first mentality actually comes with fatal flaws that actively sabotage our psychology. First, achieving a goal is only a momentary change. Second, it severely restricts your happiness. It creates this toxic either-or conflict in your brain, where you think, once I reach my goal, then I'll be happy. Until then, I'm failing. Third, it puts you at odds with long-term progress by creating a nasty yo-yo effect. Runners will train incredibly hard for months, but the second they cross that finish line, they stop running. The goal was the only thing driving them, and once it's gone, they just revert right back to their old habits. And finally, perhaps most dangerously, setting goals blinds us through something called survivorship bias.
So the crucial point is this: goal setting suffers from a massive case of survivorship bias. We always concentrate on the survivors, the winners, and we mistakenly assume that their ambitious goals are what led to their success. But we conveniently overlook the fact that literally every candidate who applied for the job wanted the job. Every single Olympian at the starting line desperately wants to win the gold medal. If successful and unsuccessful people share the exact same goals, then the goal itself cannot possibly be what differentiates the winners from the losers. The goal didn't do it. It was the system of continuous, tiny, daily improvements that actually achieved the outcome.
Let's make this super practical. Imagine you have a really messy room, and you set a strict goal to clean it. If you somehow summon the motivation to tidy up, great, you will have a clean room for today. But if you maintain the exact same sloppy, disorganized habits that led to the messy room in the first place, you're going to be looking at a new pile of clutter by next week, desperately hoping for another random burst of motivation. You basically treated a symptom without curing the disease. We always think we need to change our results, but the results are not the problem. The problem is the systems that cause those results. Fix the inputs, and the outputs will literally fix themselves.
Which brings us to the core concept of this entire explainer, the atomic habit. Just as atoms are the microscopic fundamental building blocks of molecules, atomic habits are the fundamental building blocks of our entire lives. They are those tiny routines, those marginal gains, those 1% improvements we've been talking about. At first glance, they seem totally insignificant, but as that tiny decision is repeated day after day, a neural pathway sprouts and grows stronger in your brain. They are incredibly small, yes, but they are mighty. These tiny routines feel massive wins that multiply to a degree that far, far outweighs the tiny cost of their initial effort.
So, if you are out there right now having trouble changing your habits, I need you to hear this. The problem isn't you. Seriously, let that sink in. It is deeply relieving to finally understand this. The problem is not your lack of character. It's not your lack of willpower. Bad habits repeat themselves again and again, not because you don't want to change, but because you simply have the wrong system for change. As the saying goes, you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. When you finally stop obsessing over the finish line and just fall in love with the daily process, you don't have to wait to give yourself permission to be happy. The process itself becomes the reward.
And so we arrive at the most vital question you can possibly ask yourself today. Honestly, it doesn't matter how successful or unsuccessful you feel right now. All that matters is whether your current habits are putting you on the right path. Your outcomes in life are simply a lagging measure of your habits. Your net worth, it's a lagging measure of your financial habits. Your weight is a lagging measure of your eating habits. Your knowledge is a lagging measure of your learning habits. You ultimately get what you repeat. So please, stop judging yourself by your current visible results. Instead, look very closely at your trajectory. Are your daily actions moving you 1% closer to the person you want to be, or 1% further away? The daily choice is incredibly small, but the ultimate destination, that is entirely up to you.